The war in the Pacific became another bloody theater of World War II. Here, the confrontation unfolded between powerful global states, namely, the Empire of Japan and the United States of America. The battleground consisted of numerous hard-to-reach islands and vast ocean spaces, control over which effectively guaranteed inevitable victory. However, achieving this required time and enormous economic and military resources, upon which the ability to inflict maximum damage on the opponent depended. In reality, only the United States possessed such resources. Japan, meanwhile, hoped for a swift and devastating campaign that would force Washington to capitulate. Tokyo inflicted several severe defeats on the Americans, but ultimately made a grave miscalculation, one for which it was forced to pay an extraordinarily high price. Today, we will talk about the beginning and development of the war in the Pacific, as well as how the Americans managed to turn the tide in their favor. Japan, one step away from war with the United States. The Japanese Empire, whose government was heavily influenced by military leadership, had been carrying out large-scale conquests in Southeast Asia since 1931. That year, Japan seized Manchuria and turned it into a puppet state. On July 7, 1937, Japanese forces launched a full-scale invasion of China. The conquest of China had long been a goal of Tokyo, as its vast territory and virtually unlimited resources would have granted the empire true global power. In the summer of 1940, a unique opportunity emerged for Japan to easily subjugate the resource-rich French colony of Indochina. After France fell under the blows of German armies, Tokyo realized that nothing now stood in the way of acquiring this swift and much-needed prize. The occupation of Indochina was completed in just 4 days and, in addition to resources, allowed Japan to block China from the outside world. As a result, the situation in Southeast Asia escalated sharply and increasingly attracted Washington's attention. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt did not wish to escalate relations with Tokyo, fearing that it would draw the country into war at a time when Hitler was triumphing in Europe. At the same time, he did not want to abandon China or allow Tokyo to become the dominant naval power. As a result, the United States began imposing economic restrictions on Japan. These decisions alarmed the government of Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono, who sought to avoid conflict with the United States, understanding his country's vulnerability. However, the excessive influence of the military leadership prevented Kono from pursuing reconciliation with Washington. Japan continued its aggression in China, committing mass war crimes and threatening Western colonial possessions. In response, the U.S. government took radical steps that were expected to force Japan to halt its conquests and return to peaceful relations. In July 1941, a ban was imposed on oil exports to Japan, a resource vital to Japanese industry and military construction. This decision shocked the Tokyo government, placing it in an extremely unfavorable position. Without oil, Japan could not continue fighting in China for long, where the situation was steadily deteriorating. The occupied territories could not meet the empire's fuel needs, threatening the collapse of Japan's ambitions for world leadership. Prime Minister Kono's government therefore entered negotiations with the United States, attempting to lift all economic sanctions. However, the U.S. demanded the withdrawal of Japanese troops from China and other conquered territories, a step Tokyo was unwilling to take. Eventually, the Japanese military grew tired of political negotiations. In October, they effectively initiated a change in leadership. The new prime minister became General Hideki Tojo, a radical figure unwilling to make any compromises. From that moment, Japan embarked on a path toward war with the United States, while simultaneously maintaining the appearance of peaceful negotiations. Japan decided to challenge the world's strongest power militarily, believing its army was unprepared for war and that a single crushing blow to the U.S. fleet would suffice. They did not yet realize that this blow would initiate a rapid and painful process leading to the collapse of their centuries-old empire. Friends, we encourage you to subscribe to our Patreon or become a sponsor on YouTube. By doing so, you can vote on future video topics and gain access to exclusive content. We would also like to sincerely thank those you see on the screen for supporting our channel. The attack on Pearl Harbor. Japanese command decided to deliver a devastating strike against the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, located on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. The base housed the core of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, including battleships and aircraft carriers. Its destruction was meant to deprive Washington of control over the ocean. On November 26, 1941, a Japanese fleet led by Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo set sail toward Hawaii. It consisted of 6 aircraft carriers carrying more than 400 combat aircraft, including bombers and torpedo planes. The force approached Pearl Harbor around midnight on December 7 and began preparations for the attack. Although U.S. intelligence had the ability to decrypt Japanese communications and knew of Tokyo's plans, American forces were unprepared. The attack therefore came as a terrifying surprise. At dawn, around 200 Japanese aircraft in the first wave launched massive bombing attacks on U.S. battleships anchored in the harbor. They were followed by attacks from 5 Japanese midget submarines, which were eventually destroyed. Fuel depots, ammunition warehouses, the local airfield, and barracks were also hit. Around 9 a.m., Pearl Harbor was struck by a second wave of approximately 170 aircraft, causing even greater damage to ships and infrastructure. However, due to unexpectedly strong American resistance, Japan failed to destroy several critical facilities. Japanese naval officers proposed a third strike, but Vice Admiral Nagumo refused, fearing heavy aircraft losses. As a result, the Americans lost about 2,400 servicemen, nearly 200 aircraft, and 8 battleships. 2 Arizona and Oklahoma were sunk, while others were later returned to service. Japan lost only 29 aircraft and believed it had achieved complete success. However, the American aircraft carriers were not in the harbor at the time, they were on exercises. Ironically, those carriers would soon deal a devastating blow to the Japanese fleet, ending its brief period of dominance. While Americans were recovering from the shock, Japan launched rapid invasions of American and British possessions in Southeast Asia. On December 8, President Franklin Roosevelt officially declared U.S. entry into World War II. All economic and military power of the United States was now directed against an aggressor that had clearly overestimated its capabilities, though time was needed for that power to take effect. The Philippine Campaign. On December 8, Japan launched an attack on the Philippines, a major American colony in Southeast Asia. The islands hosted over 150,000 American troops under General Douglas MacArthur. Japan sought to eliminate all U.S. naval and air bases that could threaten the empire directly. The invasion was carried out by the 14th Army under General Masaharu Homma, numbering around 130,000 troops with armored support. Japanese forces first landed on Baton Island, then on Camagan. They also landed unopposed in northern Luzon. On December 22, another landing took place on eastern Luzon, creating serious breaches in the defenders' lines. MacArthur ordered a retreat to the fortified Bataan Peninsula. Japanese forces advanced rapidly and captured Manila on January 2, 1942. Believing victory would be easy, Japanese command redeployed part of its forces elsewhere, replacing them with less capable units. This led to an unexpected Japanese defeat during the first attempt to break through American defenses. Although the Japanese recovered and resumed the offensive, shortages, disease, and isolation doomed the defenders. After renewed assaults supported by tanks and artillery, American forces retreated to Corregidor. On May 8, 1942, General Jonathan Wainwright surrendered. All surviving American and Filipino forces laid down their arms. This defeat was a severe blow to American morale, but it did not break the nation's resolve. The Battle of Midway. The defeat in the Philippines was offset by a decisive naval battle in early June 1942 that marked a turning point in the war. Japan sought to seize the strategic Midway Atoll to launch another attack on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto dispersed his forces to confuse the Americans, a fatal mistake. U.S. codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications and identified the attack location. The battle lasted 3 days and ended in catastrophe for Japan. All 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk, along with more than 200 aircraft. Japan lost naval supremacy forever. From that moment, the initiative at sea passed to the United States. The Battle of Guadalcanal. In spring 1942, Japan captured parts of the Solomon Islands, including the strategic island of Guadalcanal, where it began constructing an airfield. To prevent disruption of supply lines between the U.S. and Australia, American forces launched an invasion on August 7, 1942. The battle turned into a brutal struggle marked by disease, starvation, and relentless combat. After months of failed assaults and massive casualties, Japan evacuated its remaining forces by February 1943. Not a single Japanese soldier remained, only thousands of bodies. The United States had secured a hard-fought and decisive victory. From that moment on, American dominance in the Pacific War was unquestionable.